When we develop an application with GeneXus, the database where the main information managed by the application is stored is automatically created. However, on many occasions we need to access other data sources. Information systems can publish services on the web that provide data of various kinds, whether public or private. These web services can also include access to functionalities that may be useful to meet the requirements of our application. For example, suppose we need to select a country from a list of countries to assign it to some entity. In this case, it is more practical to access a repository where we can obtain the entire list of countries instead of entering them one by one through our application screens. Additionally, it is likely that this list will remain up to date, and we avoid the work of having to maintain the data's validity ourselves. One solution for this is to connect to a web service that publishes the list of countries as a service. These services can use REST or SOAP connection protocols. By consuming the web service, we can obtain a file with the data in a structured format, for example, JSON or XML. We use this data in our application, either by populating a structure in memory or a table. From time to time, we will update this information. Let's look at the case of importing a REST service that publishes country information. The example is taken from the page https://restcountries.com, which provides several APIs, as we can see in the links under the title endpoints. For example, all, which brings information about all countries, name, to search for the data of a country by its name, or to search by currency, language, region, etc. Here we see an example of how to access the API, which brings all the countries, but it suggests that we request the information filtered by certain fields, for example, to bring only the name and flag information. Each service that publishes an API provides information on how to invoke the API. For example, if we go further down below. On this page, we find a section called Fields, which gives us a link to a document that shows us the fields the API uses to provide information, or that we can use to filter. As a first test, we can fetch information about the names and flags of all countries, as the example suggests. We copy this URL and paste it into a new browser window. We see that the API returns a JSON where, in its structure, the fields are present. For example, here we see the information for Italy with its names. Thank you. The most used one, the official one, etc. And information about the images of its flag. Let's go to GeneXus to see how we can extract this information. The idea is to create a screen that lists the countries and for each country shows its name and its area in square kilometers. The first thing we need to do is go to the API documentation and check if the field is available. Area, because we already saw in the example that the name field was available. We see that yes, the area is there, so we build the query URL and press enter. Then we select the content of the JSON, copy it, and go to the GeneXus IDE. We will use a tool that allows us to read the JSON and automatically creates an SDT for us with the structure of the JSON. We open Tools, Application Integration, and select JSON. In the dialog box, we give it the name Countries with Areas, and in the description we write Countries with Areas in square kilometers. Then we select Text, paste the JSON into the box, and press OK. We see that an SDT named Countries with Areas is created. And if we open it, we can identify the same structure that the JSON showed us. For example, we see that it is an SDT collection and that each item has a name, which includes several fields such as common, official, etc. And also the area. Now we are going to create an object. A web panel getCountriesFrom API to display the information received. First, let's add the variables for the data we want to display in the grid. Country name and area. Then, in the web layout, we add a button and a grid that includes these variables. We double-click on the button. And in this event is where we will program the API call and the processing of the response received. To call the API, we will use the HTTP protocol, so we define a variable called HTTP client, which is automatically set with that data type. To handle the data from the SDT collection, we create a variable called countries with areas, which is automatically based on the SDT data type. We also create a variable called oneCountryWithArea, which we define as the item type of the collection, that is, countries with areas item. Based on the URL we use to call the service, we assign the corresponding properties to the HTTP client variable. We assign values to the host, secure, and base URL properties. Then we call the execute method and pass the parameters get and the part of the URL that needs to be completed to call the AL API so that it returns the name and area fields. When this method is executed, the JSON with the data will be saved in the HTTP client variable. So we are going to use the seed collection variable we defined to load it with that data. We type the variable countries with areas dot select from JSON, and inside the parentheses we write HTTP client to string. Before sending the data to the screen, we are going to sort the collection by the country name, since in the JSON it was unordered. We use the sort method of the collection and sort by name.common, since we want to display the common name, so we sort by that. And since we need the load event to be triggered so that the grid loads, we write grid1.refresh, which will trigger the grid's refresh event, which in turn will execute the load event. In the grid1.load event, we iterate over the collection to send the data for each country's name and its area to the layout grid. We write the for loop using the variable oneCountryWithArea for each element in the collection and assign the variables country name and country area. We add the load command so that these variables are copied to each row of the grid on the screen in each iteration. We run it with F5. We run the web panel get countries from API. We see that our application opens in the browser. We click the button. And on the screen, a list of hundreds of countries is displayed with their name and area, just as we wanted. As we can see, being able to consume services made by a third party is extremely useful because it provides us with information that we would otherwise have to enter manually. But we can also publish our own services, as we saw before, and consume them from another system, which greatly increases our flexibility when developing applications.